So, welcome to our very first English edition of the Futures Lounge. It's number 45. A long time we run this format, this online discussion, and the very first English one. And yeah, it's special to us. We are sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley, although you might think we are sitting in Bryce Canyon. And we have very special guests and very interesting topic. It's yeah, the next big thing. So what else? Alex, shall we introduce D2030 and the Futures Lounge and our topic a little bit before we start discussing with our speakers?
I think that's a special point in this Futures launch that if it's for the first time in English, we might have some guests who do not know that much about our initiative D2030, which is the host of this Futures launch. So the idea is this time to start with a 3 to 4 minute introduction on where we come from and who invites you to this Futures launch. And let me check that I show you some slides here. And yeah, the initiative D2030 stands for Germany 2030. And we are a non-profit association built by people who are interested in the future of society, of politics, science, business. We have been founded in 2015, are a non-profit association since 2019. And the overall idea is to give the future a voice in the dialogue, in the societal dialogue. And therefore, we initiated also these futures launches, which take place every first Wednesday a month. So you can easily calculate that we are in the fourth year right now. And what you see here on the right side are the results of a large first project that we run between 2016 and 2018, and that have been the Germany 2030 scenarios, which have been published. And what you see here among these scenarios is one which was named New Horizons. And that was the basis for the second large project that we ran between 23 and 24 with a scenario team of more than 50 members. And the question in these scenarios was a little bit different. We asked what could be the goal? What could be the objective for a positive and sustainable development of Germany? And again, we went through a process with, as I mentioned, 50 members of a scenario team with more than 150 people participating in an online dialogue. And at the end, we came up with 7 scenarios, 7 possible target pictures for Germany. And that is the result we work with a lot during the last month. And you see these 7 scenarios here on the left side. They range from scenarios which look on preservation and stabilization, like the 2 ones here in the lower part, up to the more ambivalent scenarios like green growth and techno-optimism, up to the 3 scenarios in the upper part, which we really named the New Horizon scenarios, because they are built on new wealth models, on new economic models, on accepted changes in our lifestyle, but they are still different. And that maybe is a little bit or a good bridge to our discussions that we have. So there's one scenario which we named the sustainable system change scenario. And we could ask the question, how much of such a system change is necessary? How much is possible in the future? And on the other hand, we have this scenario number 4, which we named the eco-liberal transformation. So are there options to realize these changes within liberal and free markets? And which role could technologies play here? And the interesting point is that we had a third scenario, which we named radical compromises. And that, of course, stimulates the question, how could such radical compromises look like? And these are just some questions that came up to us and which we can use as some guiding lines for our discussions that we have here. And maybe it's not us who should talk that much, but our guests. So, Hannah, let's see who joins us here.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yeah, when working with New Horizons, we started talking with many interesting people. And one of them was Richard. We met him in person in Berlin, and that's yeah, very strange because he's from New Zealand. Yeah, Richard Gill, over the past 30 years, maybe a bit longer, he started, founded and led some very interesting companies. Some rocketed in international success, others took a slightly more traditional way, he says himself. And now he's in consulting and advising societies, companies, and yeah, people how to transform society, economy, and what technology can do. But I think he's the best to tell his story himself. So, Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, it's great to be here. Let me just share some slides. Can everybody see those okay? Great. So look, thanks both to Alex and Hannah for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it was great to meet you in Berlin in person a few weeks ago. As you said, I am from New Zealand, although I travel extensively, and ironically, I'm in Germany right at the moment, which was unplanned, but great to be here. Look, very quickly, my background is I am a technologist. I've founded a number of different technology companies over the years in just about every sector you can imagine. We've built products and all sorts of things. And I've also had a dual sort of career in governance, particularly in science over the last 15, 20 years. I'm passionate about technology and the ability for technology to create radical positive change in people's lives. So look, I'm going to talk about some interesting things today. But first, I want to start off by asking everybody a question that I want you to consider while we go through this talk. What would you do with your life starting today if all your material needs were met? Everything you needed to live a good, healthy, wonderful life was needed. All the food, the shelter, the healthcare, the transportation, the medical, education, everything you needed to live a great life was guaranteed 100% for the rest of your life. But not just for you, for your loved ones, the people you hold dear, the people you care about. In fact, everybody, everywhere. What would you do? What would you do with your life? Today, I'm going to talk about how that world is not just possible, it's closer than we think. But we have some important choices to make to ensure that we get there. I'm going to talk a bit from some work that comes from a few decades of groundbreaking research and insights from the team at RethinkX, also a not-for-profit research organization, and their founders, James Arbib and Tony Sieber. I've had the pleasure of leading the team there for a number of years until we recently spun out NavigateX, which is an organization to help companies, governments, investors, and others turn all this research and insights into concrete action. I'd really encourage you, if anything I say today sparks your interest, I'd encourage you to read a copy of Stellar, A World Beyond Limits and How to Get There, and some of the many publications from RethinkX, as I'm only touching on a few of these points very lightly. Let's start with some context. History shows from all our research that we are in the midst of the fastest, deepest, most consequential transformation of human civilization in history. A transformation every bit as significant as the move from foraging to cities and agriculture 10,000 years ago. Why is this happening? It all comes down to a fundamental change in our ability to create and apply knowledge. In other words, our technologies. Technologies are, after all, just applied knowledge. History clearly shows that much of human progress has been driven by our technological capabilities. If you include our social sciences as technology, because they are, after all, applied knowledge, then it's nearly all of our progress comes from that. And there is a science to how technology drives progress through disruption. And I'm going to start by covering a few key principles of disruption and then talk about where it is taking us. First, disruption occurs as a complex system. Like biology, everything is interconnected, and a change in one place has implications everywhere else. A new technology, like, say, the internet, emerges in the information sector and completely changes all other sectors: energy, transportation, food, materials, labor, healthcare, etc. Secondly, it usually happens from outside of a sector with a convergence of different technologies. If you're looking inside a single sector, you're going to miss what's really happening and potentially leave yourself open to being disrupted from the outside. A couple of good examples. If you were a car manufacturer 15 or 20 years ago, there might be some on this call, but if you were a car manufacturer then, you were probably looking at the transport sector and fuels and innovations in those sectors for where disruption might come from. But you probably should have been looking at consumer electronics, because the iPhone made the electric car possible. And today's advanced EVs are really just iPhones on wheels. Innovations in post-war fashion in the 50s to end the use of silk in women's stockings led to a dental health hygiene revolution. Nylon toothbrushes, and we all started brushing our teeth twice a day. We monitor thousands of technologies across all sectors and look for these kind of convergences. Why do new technologies disrupt? It's not because people want them. It happens for pure economic reasons. As a new technology improves to become 10 times better or 10 times cheaper than the incumbent, adoption takes off in a rapid S-curve. Economies of scale drive lower costs and then accelerate further adoption. And as new technologies adoption scales rapidly, the incumbent technology collapses following a reverse S-curve. Incumbents enter what we call the death spiral. Higher costs spread over less product. Eventually, they can't compete and simply go bankrupt. What happened to Kodak will happen to today's oil and gas industry. These disruptions happen fast, usually within a decade or so of the new technology starting up the adoption S-curve. It's game over. Another important thing to bear in mind is that these new technologies are inevitable. There is no stopping them. Economics drives adoption. Governments can slow or accelerate adoption a little bit, but they can't stop it. The places that accelerate adoption will dramatically outperform the ones who try to slow it. And then those late adopters will have to eventually get on board, but without having the advantages of being early. So that is disruption and how it works. But something even more profound is happening right now. And I want to talk about a key fundamental of the technologies that have made up all of humanity's production systems for the last 5, 8, 10,000 years. They all have something in common. They've all required a constant flow of extractive resources to keep them going. We call this the X flow. This extractive flow requires the exploitation of people and planet as inputs. Our extractive production system can be likened to a fire. It gives off some useful outputs, heat, cooking, etc., but also lots of toxic outputs. So I want you to imagine you're in a small village 10,000 years ago. You have fire to cook and keep everybody warm. You burn the trees near you, but you start having to travel further and further to get the wood for your fire. You start to need more fires to cover the distance, a supply chain. Eventually, you bump into people from a nearby village who are also scouting close to you for wood for their own fire. Conflict arises. In order to stop them stealing your wood and all your stuff, you have to build a bigger fire, secure more forests. You capture slaves, you build armies. It's grow or be conquered. The growth imperative is born, and it is intrinsic to the extractive system. The fastest growing are rewarded, provided they maintain a minimum viable level of stability. Slower growing, more stable groups get outcompeted. This growth imperative drives concentration of wealth and power to a core group, kings, rulers, billionaires, and the cycle is self-perpetuating with all sorts of inherent problems. Inequality, racism, environmental destruction are all properties of an extractive production system. They're not bugs, they're features of the system. However, we are seeing something profoundly different emerging today. A set of foundational and non-extractive technologies are starting to scale and are impacting our entire production system. These technologies require only the seed materials to build them, but they don't require a flow of materials to fuel them. We call these stellar technologies. They're powered by the sun, and once built, they radiate output without further need of extractive inputs. Some of these core technologies are solar, wind, and batteries and energy, artificial intelligence and robotics and labor, precision fermentation and cellular agriculture and food and materials, electric vehicles, ride-hailing, autonomy in transport, etc. Yes, they require extraction to build them, but not to fuel them. Their fuel is literally the sun. So not only does the X flow stop, so do the toxic outputs that come from it. You build that SWB energy system, and you have decades of energy produced without further inputs at near zero marginal cost. It all becomes about CapEx, not OpEx. And another interesting point is, as we go along, as we build the SWB AI and robotic systems to a certain point, eventually they'll start to build themselves. We call this the ignition point. And that is when scale starts to accelerate at exponential, or more likely double exponential rates. And this is where humanity's true potential can really be unlocked. But we have some important choices to make. We're at a crucial point in our civilization where the underlying change of our technological foundations will impact everything. Every industry on Earth faces disruption, as does every type of job, every financial or political system. Our very belief systems will be challenged. What does work mean? Or what does wealth mean when our economic systems move from managing scarcity to allocating superabundant, virtually free outputs? We have already passed the rupture point on this diagram, and change is inevitable, and it's upon us now. However, the outcomes, the systems that we evolve to organize human existence around these technologies is a matter of choices. The choices we make over the next few years will establish where we might end up. I'm going to touch on two possible futures that can result from our choices now. The first, a dystopian future. And this is what we are likely to walk into if we don't make conscious choices. This is where we have the benefits of all these amazing technologies, a production system that produces boundless useful outputs, but is owned and captured by a small elite, a new core group. This future turbo boosts inequality at all levels. Even today's wealthy classes will become serfs to the handful of billionaires that own our entire production capability. When all our food, healthcare, housing, clothing, physical needs are produced by this amazing automated system, but it doesn't need us as inputs. What's our value? Control of this system and the allocation of outputs is in the hand of a few individuals. Then this is effectively the capture of all real human wealth by a tiny select group, with everybody else dependent on them for their very survival. So, in case you missed it, this is what we want to avoid. The second, which we want to aim for, is what we call the stellar world. In this world, we have these incredible technologies and a super production system that meets the needs of all humanity. Everyone has their essential needs met, and humanity can transcend scarcity and evolve new societal structures. In this system, wealth and capital are embedded inside the production system rather than being owned by a core group. This represents a profound evolution in the way humans organize and harness their production capabilities. And it is the only system that is sustainable in the long term, both for people and planet. It creates both incredible stability and unconstrained abundance, allowing us to reach the new heights in creativity and innovation and explore what it truly means to be human when we are free from the trauma of just living to survive. In order to avoid dystopia and achieve a stellar world, there are some key interventions and things and policies and things we can put in place right now. And this is where the work that we at RethinkX are doing is to help organizations, governments, investors, and others figure this stuff out and chart and navigate that course to a stellar North Star. And that North Star is important. That's the most critical thing, is understanding where we're heading. But there's some other key things that are really important. Accelerating the core stellar technologies like SWB energy systems and precision fermentation food, but with a focus on decentralization and empowerment at every level. Some key policy development. An energy bill of rights. What that means is to allow every individual to generate, store, and trade their own electricity without needing any government or corporations in the middle, peer to peer. Allow everybody to do it. Secondly, we need to revisit our intellectual property rights, in particular those rights around the ability to patent molecules or combinations of molecules. We don't want big pharma to become big food and own everything. And in fact, in the age of artificial intelligence, IP protection doesn't really mean what it once did. And the third key, and probably the most vital piece of policy advice, is during this great period of transformation, is to protect people. Protect people, not jobs, not companies, not industries, not special interests, just people. And a key thing that we are working with groups on is to do what we call creating stellar nurseries, places where these stellar technologies can come together and birth this new production system. And many of these are not sort of at the center of our current sort of industrial empires. These are smaller cities or regions on the edge. But these first cities and regions that build the stellar technologies will outperform and outcompete others and be able to experiment with the social and economic systems that confer the most advantage in a post-extraction stellar world. And I want to return to the question I asked at the beginning. What would you do starting today if you and everyone you care about had all their material needs met, guaranteed for life? How would you begin to heal the trauma of just existing, the survival that extraction has inflicted on you and me and everybody and the entire human race? What would you do? Thank you.
Wow, Richard, this was once again very inspiring. And I have a lot of questions, but I think first it's time for our second speaker. And yeah, when we talked in person in Berlin, I asked you, Richard, this sounds really cool. How can we implement it? How can we roll out this stellar world? And you told me, well, we have to show the world it's possible. You just mentioned the stellar nurseries and said, well, let's talk to Helmut. And I thought, Helmut, that's a typical Kiwi name. He must also be from New Zealand. Yeah, and now we have the opportunity to let him speak for himself. He's an experienced director and consultant with special skills in implementation and change management. He was active in the private sector, but what he wants to tell us now is very interesting because he rolls out the stellar philosophy in a community, and I think he can also explain best himself what he does.
And maybe we have to add the big thank you in the beginning, because
Yes.
Helmut is not sitting in Cologne like Richard is doing. He's sitting in New Zealand, and it's really early in New Zealand that time. So thanks a lot, Helmut, especially for
Getting up that early.
Yeah.
And looking so good.
Well, look, kia ora, good morning and greetings to everyone. I'm feeling like I shouldn't speak, actually. I was so inspired again to hear from Richard, such a clear and, excuse me, compelling presentation of the stellar philosophy of moving forward into the future, that my preference would be to not speak and to, in fact, have a lot of questions of Richard in discussion. But I have been asked to share, and so I'll do so now. I can just make sure I... before I do that, because I'm sure some of you be thinking, how does a Maori boy from New Zealand have a German name? So I'll get that out of the way quickly. My father came to New Zealand after the war in '53 with an Austrian company to build state houses in New Zealand, and he met my mother, and that was the end of that. So good to be with you anyway. I'll just share my screen, and hopefully I do this right. I trust we're in business. Is that okay? Very good. So everyone, the heading that I've chosen to share with you, or first let me introduce myself. So kia ora no tātou. So I'm the Chief Executive Officer of one of the First Nations Indigenous tribal tribes in New Zealand. We call that an iwi. And I belong to a tribe of people who descend from a shared ancestor by the name of Toa Rangatira. And the context of, excuse me, the context of my presentation really is as a tribal authority within a city of about 63,000 people who have been on a journey in recent years of moving beyond the colonial era and post-colonial era into a future of our own making that reflects the vision and the values that we have for ourselves. And I've, excuse me, I've headed my presentation with the use of a proverb, a brief proverb, ka mua ka muri, which is the idea of walking into the future with your eyes back on where you've come from. So anyway, we'll crack into it. So I thought it would be useful for me to begin by, if I could make this slideshow go forward, begin by introducing my tribe, Ngāti Toa, and who we are. So we're a part of a group of descendants who arrived in New Zealand about 900 years ago on the Tainui Waka, or the Tainui canoe. Our ancestors left a small area of Polynesia, an island or group of islands called Rangiatea, also Hawaii, sailed across the large thousands of kilometers of the Pacific to arrive in Aotearoa, New Zealand, as I say, about 900 years ago, and settled eventually on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand. Our ancestors, as they arrived, found a land that in every material sense was radically different from the environment that they had left. And so as a consequence, they changed themselves, their technology, their approaches, their habits, their customs, in order to take care of their needs in this new land. By contrast, centuries later, when others arrived in this land, they had a different philosophy. And instead of living sustainably on this beautiful new land that they encountered, they decided to change the land itself and made a mess of the place. 200 years ago, my people, Ngāti Toa, moved from the west coast in the middle of the North Island for the same reasons that our original ancestors came here, basically as a consequence of existential threat from resource depletion, not depletion so much as competition, as the population grew and others around, pretty much the same dynamic that Richard described, pressing in on them. And so they moved south to the bottom of the North Island, and on this little island there, Kapiti found refuge for a while until they were able to establish themselves and eventually actually achieve a position of dominance at the bottom of the North Island and top of the South Island. It was in that situation of relative prosperity that the British arrived at the early part of the 19th century, encountered our tribe and our people. And then over the course of the 19th century, the experience of colonial dispossession, impoverishment, etc., took place here, just like it did take place everywhere else in New Zealand and across a great deal of the world. When the 20th century began, which is when my grandfather was born, my tribe was living on the shores of Porirua Harbour. There were less than 100 members of our tribe left alive as a consequence of impoverishment and the arrival of diseases and so forth that our people struggled to cope with. And so we lived there through all of the 20th century and then into the beginning of the 21st century. When I was a boy, the post-war urbanization and industrial boom in New Zealand resulted in the government of the day looking around the country for places where rapid urbanization and development of housing and an industry could take place. And as it turns out, Porirua, our tribal area and city, or became a city, was chosen. And so in the 50s and 60s, large-scale, rapid development of the land took place in order to accommodate what was needed for housing for the new workforce that was coming from the Pacific and from the country areas in New Zealand, coming to the cities in order to support that urbanization and industrialization journey. The consequence of that rapid transformation of our city, our environment, was the tragic degradation of the beautiful waterways that had been the food basket for our people for generations. In addition to its degradation and sedimentation, the choices made by the government of the day to create these intensive houses created, in effect, ghettos that by the time we got through to the 70s and 80s, the choices made around them were beginning to show both in the degradation of the built environment and in the consequences in the social environment in certain parts, the eastern parts of our city. And so we move into my adult lifetime when our tribe, under the leader of my tribe, who preceded me took the decision that we had no intention of allowing any further top-down determination of our future, of our place in our city, and that we would instead take our lives and our city into our own hands, and that we would transform it according to our own preferences around the renewal of our waterways, our beautiful harbour, which it doesn't look like what you're seeing. This is what we envisioned its return to what it once was. It did used to look like this. And so we have not only got a vision for the renewal of our environment and our waterways, which is so vital to our well-being, but also to the built environment, our social environment, our economic environment. And that's the vision that motivates us. The organization that I lead is the Tribal Authority for Ngāti Toa. We employ currently over 500 staff, about 550, in a broad range of social enterprises that support the well-being of our people and the community, what we call the manuhiri, or the visitors who live in our tribal boundaries. We are motivated by a simple vision of enhancing the well-being, prosperity, and mana, or ability to live dignified lives of our people in the community. And our essential strategy is to paddle our own waka, or in other words, to lift where we stand and to act for ourselves in a vision of self-determination by directly creating the world we want to live in. Our how is the values, the core values in our Maori language. The word is tikanga, are as laid out on the presentation here. These are core values that have come to us from our old people and which sustained them for 1,000 years and before. And it is our belief that they will sustain us if we have the wisdom to apply them in the contemporary setting which we find ourselves. The way we think about what it is we're doing is through a holistic lens. Our experience and belief is that the human condition is a complex, interrelated, multifactorial reality that requires us as human beings to be aware that we're not just an organic machine, that if you get the chemicals right, everything will be great. That no, we are this complex interweaving of psychology, emotion, spiritual, physical, etc. And so that holistic view is captured in what we call in our language Māori order, or holistic well-being. And so the ecosystem of support for our community, we call our Māori order model, is aimed at being a horizontally integrated set of services that any door is the right door for accessing the full spectrum. So that as our people engage with our Māori order ecosystem, they're assured of being able to be supported through the breadth of the needs that they and their families may have. Our strategy, as I said, is to lift where we stand and to invest directly our tribal resources in creating the actual world, a renewal of the natural environment, and the creation of a built environment that reflects our values, our vision, and the way we want to live. For example, when I began my role 5.5 years ago, New Zealand was facing a housing crisis. It's a challenge we share with many countries around the world. And so we proceeded to invest in the acquisition and or creation of a spectrum of commercial enterprises and one social enterprise in order to create a full spectrum, a continuum of housing that reflects where our tribal members and our wider community are at in their life course. As we all know, as people move through their life cycle, they are variously able, primarily for economic reasons, to access housing at a price point or on conditions that they meet. And so social housing, affordable rental, ownership, etc., is a reasonably orthodox continuum of housing product. And so Ngāti Toa has invested in creating a ecosystem of vertically integrated commercial enterprises to deliver on that continuum, to enable our iwi and our community members to have access to the housing that they need according to the point in their life course and prosperity cycle that they're in. And that's what we've done. Te Ahuru Mōwai is our community housing arm. We have nearly 1,000 social homes under our management that we make available for the wider community, for those who need social housing. Our Runanga itself has a portfolio of housing for our elderly. Toa Homes is a joint venture we created with some partners from offshore, where we have developed off-site manufactured panelized homes that are passive homes or energy efficient high performance homes that we sell into the market. And then Toa Developments is a reasonably orthodox property and housing, affordable and market housing development company. They're all owned by the tribe. I've alluded to the fact that we have we've created a vertically integrated commercial portfolio to deliver on our initial priorities of land and housing, and more recently we've pivoted, added the priority of infrastructure. For your information, in New Zealand, the majority of our infrastructure built over the last 100 years is way past its use by date, and the obsolescence and degradation is at the point now where right across our whole country, the need for urgent renewal of both our social and particularly physical infrastructure is getting to a crisis point. So the core reason for the degradation of the environment, so important to our tribe, is the poor design and collapsing performance of the infrastructure. So we're all in on infrastructure and are in the process of adding to our economic portfolio assets and enterprises that will deliver directly on the renewal of our infrastructure in our city. Who's working with us? Our old people came to this land in a waka haurua. That's a dual-hulled waka. It's the only waka or canoe that can traverse the deep oceans, the deep waters. And that's the kind of waters we're still in. And so that strategy of duality, of partnered endeavor, is a guiding principle for us. And so in the pursuit of our vision of an enhanced future, we are deliberate in seeking those who share our vision and values, lashing ourselves tightly to them and working together for mutual benefit. And that is a strategy that has borne fruit both anciently and in contemporary times for us. And these are a range of private and public sector organizations with formal partnership relationships with my tribe in pursuit of that vision. Just to finish and narrow the focus to some of the areas that Richard and the Stellar team have focused on. For us as Indigenous people, and we share this with Indigenous communities around the world, we have a holistic view of ourselves living as a part of the wider ecosystem. Thankfully, increasingly, that's a worldview that is shared by people, by more and more people around the world. And so as we are investing and acting to create an environment that sustains our community, we're cognizant of the need to do so sustainably and not, in the language of Richard and the Stellar team, not extractively. That has been our values and approach to living forever. And as a consequence of the pursuit of that vision and those values, in 5 years, our tribe has exploded from a total asset base in 2020 of just over 200 million, where today we have total assets under management of over $1 billion. That's a good trick, family. And my observation would be that not once in that 5-year window did we ever ask ourselves, what can we do to make money? Not once. The only questions we sought is, what can we do to enhance well-being, prosperity, and mana or dignity of the lives of our people and those who live in our community. And as we pursued that vision with the values that our old people gave to us, the outcome has been transformative. Now, so apologies for the sports allusion, but in New Zealand, rugby is a big deal. And there is a particular part of the game where players bind themselves together and they enter into a competition with the opposing team to push each other, and that's called a scrum. And so the metaphor here is that tight scrums win games in our rugby metaphor. And that's been a lesson for us. I've alluded to the power of uniting yourselves with people who share your vision and values, and that as you do so, that's been a characteristic of our success, is forming tight scrums with people who share that vision and values. Just the last couple of observations from me. What we've learned as we've gone through our journey in the last few years is that the why is vastly important, more important than the what. Everyone wants to be inspired. Everyone wants to come to work and give themselves every day to something that's meaningful and inspirational. And we've found that our why has done that for the people who work for and with us. And that as a consequence, we've ended up creating an ecosystem of people who behave more like patriots than mercenaries. It's perhaps not an ideal metaphor, but it captures the spirit of the change that we've experienced on the ground. My last slide, I've lost my clicker. My last slide is really just to make the point, double down on the point of the why. Our people believe that we are the kaitiaki, or the guardians of the people and place that have come to us, and that it's our birthright and our duty to leave a legacy. This is the way we think about who we are, what we're doing, and that as a consequence, we are determined to do everything in our power to heal and renew and leave a legacy for our moko, for our grandchildren, that they will bless us for doing. And this final slide, which is a proverb from our people, is really capturing the heart of the message. Just to finally tie back in, and I am done, tie back into the message that Richard gave. When we encountered the stellar philosophy and the power of the ideas contained within it, you will see the alignment because of its non-extractive vision and frame, because of its emphasis on enabling technologies to create abundance. And we are all in on it. We already have work and train around using some of our lands for creation of solar farms. But the ideas that Richard has given us to push that even harder, to accelerate an energy abundant city, to leverage some of the ideas that he shared about leveraging the leading edge and established technologies that are available for our food, etc. These are all ideas that resonate entirely with us as we look to create a village of villages in the city that we call home. So kia ora, everyone. That's my story.
Thank you very much, Helmut. This was also very inspiring and seems to be both sides of the medal, technology on the one hand, society on the other, and it works well together. Yeah, it was Really plenty of input, and one comment on LinkedIn where many people follow the discussion is, oh wow, that's really a lot of input I can't follow. Is it possible to get it later on? Yeah, good news. This session is recorded, so it will be available on YouTube, and maybe we could ask our speakers to give the slides to the public that everyone can read and make up their minds, because it's really much food for thought. So we collected some questions, and I think Alex, you want to start?
Yeah, there are so many questions that even came up to me during the discussion, but maybe, Richard, we should start with a question that came up to me during the last weeks when I brought in your input, and many people told me, "Oh, that's totally utopian. That is something we are even in doubt whether we could bring that in as a scenario." It's so, and you really described it as the future where the world is heading to. So how do you cope with people who are that skeptical?
It's a really good question. You know, a few weeks ago, I was flying somewhere out of New Zealand to Vancouver, I think, and I had the privilege of experiencing Air New Zealand's new business class seats. They're brand spanking new, and they're all shiny and great. And I remember getting in the plane, sitting there and thinking, I just had this moment where I thought, you know, I'm living in the future. Here I am on a jet at a moment's notice. I can fly around the world in great comfort with all this technology and watch movies and be entertained and have all of that. 100 years ago, that was science fiction or utopian, really. And we live in levels of prosperity and shared experience today that's unimaginable just a generation or two ago. So, I think if there's one thing that history teaches us is that our technological capabilities are continuing to take humanity on a pathway to these new experiences and these new capabilities. So that's not in question. The only question really is how we organize and who gets to benefit the most from this. The other thing I was been thinking is it doesn't matter rich or poor where you go, everybody has a smartphone these days. And so that would have been inconceivable when I was a teenager trying to assemble my first computer with soldering iron and chips and wires and keyboards, right? The ability to have all that power in your fingertips. So we are living in the future. It's just how we organize around it. And what is the human interpretation of our current world? Does that kind of answer the question? I'm not sure it does.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So technology is there. The big question is if we as human beings are able to organize things. You talk a lot about energy as a starting point. And yeah, people have difficulties of understanding how to change the energy system. They say, well, the wind is not always blowing, the sun is not always shining, energy storage is very expensive. How should that work? Why don't we use nuclear instead? What is your answer to this question?
Yeah, so back to my original slides, it's all about economics, right? So let's compare solar, wind, and batteries. Solar dropped by nearly roughly 90% in cost over the last decade, and it's on the same trajectory this decade. In fact, in parts of Australia, it's cheaper to line your fences with solar panels than it is to line them with wood panels when you're building a fence, right? Solar panels are so cheap. Onshore wind dropped by 46% last decade, and it's in terms of cost capability, it's carrying on the same trajectory. Lithium-ion batteries, 90% in the last decade, and that's carrying on in the same trajectory. This stuff is just getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper at an astounding rate. Yet, technologies like nuclear, well, first up, there's never been a nuclear power plant anywhere in the world that wasn't government subsidized. It doesn't economically stand on its own. Secondly, nuclear is one of the few technologies that has a negative experience curve. The more we build, the more expensive it becomes, right? Because we learn all these new things that are required to make it safer. And so we have to build more of them. And then we learn all the risks, so we try and build them safer and safer and safer. So nuclear continues to get more and more and more expensive, whereas all these other technologies are getting cheaper and cheaper by the moment. And so the economics of solar, wind, and batteries outperform every other energy technology there is. It's already the cheapest way. But there's one other key magic to it. Particularly solar and batteries can be deployed at any scale: rooftop, household, commercial businesses, etc. So the future of the energy system is highly distributed. You allow everybody to become a generator of energy, the same way everybody today is a creator of content with their smartphones. We no longer have the old television networks, and Hollywood is no longer the center of all content production. TikTok and YouTube and what we're doing right here, anybody can be a content producer. And energy will follow that same pattern. Anybody can produce energy anywhere they are. And so the dynamics of the energy system, the new energy system that's evolving, is fundamentally different. Decentralized, bottom up, peer to peer. And that's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anna, maybe it's not us who should ask all the questions.
Yeah, but I have one more question to Helmut. When you started in your community, what was your starting point? Did you pick out one technology, one area? Did you say we have to change energy system or healthcare, or is it a complex system you installed?
Yeah, look, I tried to be rational and orderly about it all. We did, because when I started, we had just begun the COVID period, and so we had a bit of time to think about things. So did a current state analysis, looked at what was available to us at that point in time. We had a vision and some goals in terms of where we wanted to go. And so the plan was to really just fill gaps in our current people policy technology base that we were operating out of. A year later, we'd work to optimize it, and then a year or two later, we'd look to grow. But it didn't play out like that. The concurrent imperatives to respond to the needs in our community, which was so material, they're pressing in on us. The opportunities that emerged for us to respond in an agile way pressed in on us. And so we found ourselves having to rebuild the 747 while we were flying it, which is a good trick and an exercise in chaotic change management. But that's just the nature of our reality. So my main observation would be that really being open to the potential of transformative ideas. Transformative ideas and technologies, bringing to bear capability to evaluate, do due diligence and evaluate the opportunities they emerge, and then being intentional in your investment roadmap to adopt, fail fast, learn, and go again. This has been our approach to coming at the challenges and the opportunities that we've met. And so we've done a lot concurrently, which my staff have not appreciated, but which does reflect, as I say, the imperatives and opportunities that are there.
So it's a dynamic system.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yep. We received one question from the LinkedIn community, and that is maybe to both of you, maybe Richard. The question is, what is the role of especially the monetary and the financial system in all that transition that you described?
Well, that's the billion-dollar, the trillion-dollar, the gazillion-dollar question, I think. The 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 we certainly need capital to build these new technologies and the new systems, right? We need the capital to fund the building of them. But there comes this point, I mentioned the ignition point, where the system just carries on, starts to build itself. And once you hit that point where the production system is supplying abundant useful outputs, it's sort of providing everything we need without us having to be inputs into it, we move from economics of scarcity to the economics of superabundance. And the role of the financial system at that point is there even a role? That is the question, right? Does money actually have a meaning in when you get to superabundance of everything? But the journey from here to there is quite challenging. One of the reasons for, in the energy system, one of the challenges for people when they look at the energy system is you invest all this capital to build your solar, wind, and battery system that provides you all this super abundant, near zero cost clean energy. But that same system is driving the cost of electricity down so cheap it'll be too cheap to meter. So on one hand, you're building this asset that generates vast amounts of virtually free electricity. It's fantastic, but what's the economic return on building that system, right? And the economic return on building a super abundant clean energy system with SWB is not in the price of electricity. The economic return is not selling electricity. The same way that we built roads 100, 150 years ago, but we didn't build roads so we could collect taxes per kilometer on roads, right? We built the roads as infrastructure to enable society to do all these productive things. The energy system, energy is just infrastructure in a solar, wind, and battery system. It's just like the roads. And once it requires no input to fuel it, it just gives off this free energy. But the economics has to switch from the energy price of electricity to what that energy lets you do in your society, in your community, in your production system. So I don't have full answers by any means, and I think there's lots of experiments and that go into this.
Can I have a go at that? Can I have a go at
Yeah,
that?
please.
So at the moment, we've got energy demands and the cost, the capex associated with the operation of the existing electricity generation, transmission, and distribution networks. And all of that is paid for by consumers through whatever market mechanisms that are operating in your jurisdiction. So that's the current state, and it's more or less paying for itself, increasingly unaffordably, but that's what it is. So the stellar vision progressively erodes or makes inroads into that at scale, because everybody operates large scale generation, transmission, distribution networks. Everybody does for economies of scale. The alternative vision of the stellar paradigm or model goes from the bottom up. We leverage the creation of micro capex decisions on a house, a village, a city, scaling up, where individuals or groups of individuals are making decisions on the cost benefit of swallowing the capex upfront to install that abundant solar energy generation and battery storage. There will be a payback period, when you compare it to the counterfactual of if you just tapped into the main. So there'll be a payback period, which is getting smaller and smaller. But the numbers do work for those individual or microeconomic decisions. And there's no shortage of financiers who are currently in the market financing those kind of ground up decisions. So I'm happy to tell you, because we've currently got at scale conversations going with suppliers as well as funders, that there's no problem with the economics of enabling communities to install and operate abundant solar-driven energy generation to enable the creation of micro-generation, microgrids. That's absolutely installable, absolutely financeable. It's happening right now. It's the way where it gets a little bit more tricky is if you try to do a whole of jurisdiction or a whole of city, because the capex ticket size on those sort of transactions means you got to have bigger conversations. But the organic ground up growth strategy, totally financeable as we speak.
So once the stellar world is rolled out, the financial market like we know it today would be useless, which would mean they would not there will be stakeholders not really liking the idea of transformation.
Well, I think there's a fundamental problem. We're already in system change at the moment, which is why a lot of the levers that governments and other financial institutions pull aren't really working as they should. And that is because, for example, some of our key measures don't actually measure what we think they do. Let's take GDP, for example. So GDP, is supposed to be the measure of, economic activity in our economy. But really, GDP is a measure of the flow, the extractive flow through our economy. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If you go back 50, 60, 80 years, the most expensive, the most valuable resource on the planet was not gold, not oil, nothing. It was information, knowledge. It was expensive to produce. It was locked away in filing cabinets and libraries and hard. And if you wanted to share it with somebody, you had to make copies of it and physically send them, right? Knowledge was trapped in molecules. Then fast forward, the digital revolution came, and the cost or the marginal cost of producing more information has come to near zero, right? To distribute it. Everything's digital, and now we have super abundant amounts of knowledge and information, right? In fact, we have to filter, we have to now build AIs to keep so much of it away from us and just pick out the juicy bits we want, right? It's super abundant and virtually free to produce. Now, information was a very large part of our GDP and our economies a few decades ago. Now it's not being measured. Because when we share information like we're doing today on this call, there's no X flow, right? There's digital flow, but there's no X flow. So already GDP is not measuring this part of our economy. Now you take what's happening with, say, clean energy. If all those rooftops and those homes in Helmut's community put solar on their roofs and batteries, yes, there's a measurement of the capex that goes into building that. But then the X flow of energy stops and GDP stops measuring that. So GDP is already not measuring the full flow of our energy system through the economy, right? And all of these technologies, robotics, precision fermentation, food, right? GDP stops measuring them as we get more and more, as stellar technology scale more and more. So how is our financial system actually working if it can't measure a flow of things? Once you build an asset, there is no flow. So these are the kinds of challenges that will require great experimentation and great thought. Probably lots of people way smarter than me to figure out. But I think, money and financial systems are part of our social organizing system. They're not part of our production system. They're how we organize around it. And that's where the experiments, that's where the choices need to come in.
Yeah, can I make an observation about that, Hannah? So money is just a medium of exchange, and because none of us want to produce everything that we need, we exchange things between each other, and money is an efficient mechanism for enabling that. In a world where in fact abundant production is occurring everywhere, presumably not everywhere produces everything, so there'll still be exchange, there'll still be a role for money to efficiently enable that. But a more fundamental question to me really is where Richard ended, I think, which is on the underlying social framework that is enabling the outcome. So he offered up a polar opposite scenarios of a dystopian future or a utopian future, which is not determined by the technologies at all. It will be determined by, in fact, the underlying social contract that citizens, that the people of nations and of communities decide will be the basis on which we live and interact with one another. Now, that's always been true. The biggest questions in any society is always who decides, and who pays. That will also be true in future. And so that to my mind is actually where the greatest need for us to begin a dialogue, begin a conversation amongst ourselves, because already the extractive pressure on our existing civil societies, our democracies, are already pulling them apart. The troubles we see around the world in democracies, I would suggest, is because of the root cause of untenable levels of social and economic inequality. And so I think a vital current conversation we've got to have under all scenarios is, what does version 2 of government by the people, for the people, of the people, what does that look like? Because version 1, which we created in our grandparents' time or whenever, that's no longer fit for purpose. That, to my mind, is the piece of the puzzle, Richard, that your stellar vision needs to double down on, that there is a need for that discourse, that decision and discussion to happen today.
I couldn't agree more. And Howard, that's part of the fun of working with you, and what you're doing is, we can talk a lot about the technologies and the economic systems, but it's the social choices, it's the community choices, it's the values, the tikanga. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, and the vision,
and the
what
vision.
kind of world do you want to live in, family?
Yeah.
So in other words, the question could be whether social and sustainable communities could be the next big thing. But maybe that is the point where we should use the remaining time to open up for the discussion with our participants, and to see whether there are questions from those who participate here in our Zoom call. And if so, you could just give us a sign, and Konstantin will open up the microphone. So if there are questions from our audience, please feel free to step into our discussion. Yeah, Anke, I see you, so Konstantin will open up the microphone, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very, very thankful for all these positive input and for a positive utopia, because it is a lack in my as I see the world, we have a lack of enough people who live more for the positive points of view. I'm more on the optimistic side because I think, as you described it, things are really possible to change, but we need a lot of people. And my question goes to both of you: how to avoid the misuse, how to avoid, under the aspects of anthropology and psychology, how mankind is, how to avoid that this all is undermined by those who have so much might that they are not interested in a positive change of the world. It's not a question of you and me, and a lot of people I also know. I think it's more the question of those who have completely different interests, and I think about 10% of the world for the mankind.
And unfortunately, some of them make the rules.
That's what I didn't dare saying. But
Can I throw?
thank you very
Yeah,
much. It was very impressive from all of you.
thank you. Can I throw an answer to that? Because that's the question that I think keeps me up at night. And just before we started the call, Helmut and I had just started this sort of bantering conversation, which I'd love to continue at some point. There's a couple of things. First of all, it is it's understanding the key interventions, the key things. So I mentioned a few of them earlier in my talk. One of them was about IP rights, intellectual property rights, and ownership. And I think that's a key leverage point. Now, we don't want the energy systems or all the food and materials production system to be owned and locked up in IP that capture, right? And that's a fundamental problem. But it's also an area where we can have highly effective policy interventions. Now, but policy interventions usually aren't enough, really. They take too long and you get too much capture before governments can get there. But there's a great example where the counterintuitive nature of economics, opportunity, and policy can really work. And it's fair to say we would not have the internet and everything we have today if it wasn't for open source software and open source intellectual property rights that the internet was built on. We would still have proprietary networks of CompuServes and AOLs and Minitels of this world, where they're charging us however many dollars a minute to connect, right? We would still be in that world if it hadn't been for open ownership, right? So open ownership has created a wealth of innovation and prosperity, and opportunities have abounded. We need the same across our energy system and our food and materials and our robotics and our AI, right? If we can double down on those things, we achieve two things. We accelerate innovation and we stop centralization of ownership, right? Those are two key things. And the incentives actually align there is the way I see it.
My response is a bit more philosophical. Anke, pleased to meet you and thank you for your optimism. The answer to the question, what should I do under all circumstances, is always the same. Lift where you stand. It's a principle of human effectiveness to focus on devoting your energy within your sphere of control and influence. When we do the alternative, namely to devote our energies into the sphere of our concern, which by definition we have no control or influence over, that's a de-energizing and depressing way to live your life, right?
Exactly.
But an interesting phenomenon plays out when you wisely choose to focus on what you can control and what you can influence. that circle of control and influence expands, because by definition, you get things done. You accumulate evidence for the efficacy of your thinking and your work, and success breeds success and attracts others, and so it grows. So that's a philosophical response to your question, which is also really what's at play for my little iwi. There's only 10,000 of us, which is small, but make no mistake, we have a saying, I don't know if you have it in your culture, of punching above your weight. My people have always punched above our weight because of that willingness and determination to lift where we stand and to paddle our own waka. And so that would be my response. Kia ora.
Thank you very much.
There's also a science-based answer. I'm just reading a book by Hannah Ritchie saying not the end of the world, and she describes many positive things and says we are not the last generation, but we are the first generation who can achieve a sustainable life. So it's she's a data scientist, so it's packed with information and data. And this gives me hope, because it's not just gut feeling and the question if I'm just a bit naive thinking a world could change to a better place, but it's fact-based. So I can highly recommend this book. Available in English and also in German language, and really, really nice to read. I can send you the link, Anke.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there another question here in the Zoom call? I see a hand from JR Kick, so just ask your question. Maybe Konstantin. Yeah, okay.
The micro is not on.
We can't hear you.
Yeah. So now,
Okay.
I hope now.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect.
I wanted to go since a long time, but now I have to put this question because it sounds like it's very automated world, let's say, and automatic world. And how do you see then it doesn't need any monetary means at all at this point? And when do you see the shift from the monetary means as an organizational tool that it is a strongly automated world and without probably then use of money? Because if you have a robot, when you give him a salary, that doesn't make sense. And if you produce all, so, and when is the shift, or is it also possible in this extreme competition, what I every time refer to, also militarily? So, and if it is not necessary now to shift from the monetary system first to a network system, a global network system, that humanity can realign and then also modify the industries in this way, or to build new industries. We have already a lot of industries who work in this direction, but altogether that the final step is now that we soon change from the monetary system to a pure network system.
My view of that is that, in essence, money is basically an information system. It is signaling data, right? So if prices go up because of scarcity, it sends a signal to manufacturers to make more of that stuff, right? And then if they oversupply, the market signals back by a price that you've got too much of the stuff, so make something else, right? So, money is an information system, in essence. Now, in any production system in the future, we need signaling mechanisms, right? We need to know that the robots aren't just still churning out the same thing, that's not needed anymore, right? That the system's going to have all these signalings and controls and things to make sure it behaves efficiently. And, our market efficiencies that we have to date, leaving aside the destructiveness and the exploitation and everything, they are pretty highly efficient, and money is a mechanism for signaling that and enabling a lot of that efficiency. I think, to your point about the network, Will, I think it will move piece by piece, right? It already is in the example of information I mentioned. It already is in other things. If you're building a community of households who all have solar on their roof and batteries for storage, why would they ever think of selling that energy to one another using a currency, let alone a national currency with all the costs and compliance and needs? And it makes no sense. If you were going to share it, you'd have a distributed energy system which was fully automated. And if you needed it, it might use a blockchain ledger or something for storing things. Right? These are the kinds of systems that already work in the internet. They already work in certain technologies. There's people working on this stuff in energy systems. And so I think what you'll see is it's not going to be a day where we go, right, it's not going to be like whenever it was that Nixon took the US off the gold standard and it was on a day, or it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a gradual move, and then that move will accelerate, and money will have less currency. Money will have less value. It will have less ability to be used, and then that will accelerate in the final stages. I don't know if that answers the question, but I see that it's going to be an uneven journey through this.
It has to be. It has to be uneven. The sequencing of decoupling the medium of exchange, namely money, for the underlying goods and services that are being produced, because that will happen piecemeal within jurisdictions and across jurisdictions. There will always need to be some mechanism for both allocating resources, which was the logic you were applying, Richard, as well as a mechanism for effecting or enabling the exchange of goods and services. So the sequencing will have to reflect the readiness of the market and the underlying actors to treat with one another, which will be piecemeal. It's unavoidably so.
Okay, thank you.
Is it possible to reply on this, or is it becoming too much of a one-on-one conversation? Because I think as long as a monetary mean is used in the world, the 500 companies or the biggest companies who also supply the essential supply structure, and who are responsible, and they keep the society stable, let's say. And as long as we have one monetary mean in this, they have to sell as much as possible to overexploit the planet. And at the same time, it goes more and more in the direction of a world war, until probably sometime at a certain point all collapses. So, and then it becomes a dystopian chaos, probably. Or there is another system established which could reorganize everything a little bit, or works on a non-monetary.
Can I give an example? So Kodak used to rule the world in its sector. Doesn't exist anymore. Other industries in the last few decades, because of the transformation of the underlying dynamics, don't exist. Who's Nokia anymore? So I guess what I'm saying is that while the power that accrues to existing multinationals, because of their domination of their particular product markets, is undoubted, the vision that the Stellar model envisages, where there is a democratization of the productive endeavor, the thesis is that will take away from those concentrations of production, those multinationals. It'll take away the power, and if people aren't turning up to buy their brand because it offers no unique value proposition, they too will follow that. That's the possibility, I think, that the Stellar vision paints.
Yeah, if I could add one other thing to that, thanks, Helen, is that increasingly uh, with AI, robotics, precision fermentation, and food and materials, etc., our production system becomes decentralized, right? At the moment, globalization has driven a concentration of power and centralization, and the future starts to become decentralized. You can produce your food anywhere. You can produce those molecules anywhere with precision fermentation. All you need is energy, right? And so the concept of um, growing food in one part of the world and shipping it to another part of the world ceases to make sense. You can produce anything anywhere in this production system. What does make sense is the creativity that happens at the top of that, the design of new molecules, of new recipes, etc., that can then be shared and sent everywhere. That can happen, and that may be traded. But I think what will happen is the incumbency in a decentralized world, the incumbency cease. It decentralizes power, right? And um, and supply. So those are the opportunities. And when we look at some of the barriers at the moment in our technologies, there is this current concentration, and we have this race around AI, for example, and building the chips to supply them. And it seems like a lifetime ago, but a few months ago we had that DeepSeek moment where the Chinese team came out and trained an AI for 1 or 2% of the cost of what Americans were spending on it. That was an interesting one, and the fact that they open sourced that, whereas the American models were closed. But what to me was really interesting is the up until then, the worldview was you just need more and more and more of these highly capable NVIDIA processors for training AI, right? And these expensive, super expensive chips, and the person with the most chips was going to win. And what was happening then, it was throwing hardware to solve what was partially a software problem. And the DeepSeek guys, the Chinese team, they just figured out software way around what was seen as a hardware constraint, and they got a massive, staggering increase in capability. So where I'm going with this is, I think, to Helmut's point, the Kodak moments, the NVIDIA moments, these guys, they are the kings for a moment, but whether they remain the kings and whether they remain centralized is yet to be seen, and no kingdom lasts forever. Yeah.
I think this is a very good ending point. No kingdom lasts forever. No futures lounge lasts forever. Although I have the feeling we could discuss for hours. There's so much questions and food for thought. So thank you very much to both speakers. It was a great pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, it was.
Yep. What we could add is, Hannah mentioned that, of course, there will be a video from this Futures launch so that every one of you could re-watch it if you want to.
And spread it.
And spread it, of course. It was the first English Futures launch. I have a little bit the feeling that it will not be the last one, but because there are many ideas even outside of Germany who could be discussed in that format. Nevertheless, the next one and those following will be again in German. So the next Futures launch will be about the healthcare system and the human touch of the healthcare system. That will be on the first Wednesday in September. And yeah, so from that point of view, we would say thank you to Richard and Helmut, and to all of you who joined us, and wish you Yeah, how should we say? A good morning, a good day, a good night, wherever you watched us. And thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Thanks a
Thank
lot
you,
to all of
everybody.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Bye-bye.
us. Bye bye.